God says, I had to make you uncomfortable so you would move. And I found that on Twitter. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Toy Talks podcast. My name is, of course, Toy Washington. It's Tuesday, so you've got a brand new episode. However, it's not a conventional episode. If you remember a few episodes ago, I said that I had a couple of surprises because a few people have emailed me and basically said to me they want to get to know my personality a bit more, which is really weird because you should just be on my social media. But it's fine. I just think it's just people's opportunity to be a bit nosy, but it's fine. So, I have a very special guest. This person is the cousin of my partner, my husband, my lifelong partner. This is his cousin. His name is Gio. And the reason why I wanted him on the podcast is just because we have so many interesting conversations and he is an all-round amazing person, very balanced. So we're welcoming Gio. Can you say hello so they know you're here and I'm not talking to myself?
Hello, what an intro, man. Thank you so much, man.
Happy I like you. Here. I like you.
I like you too.
So guys, for this episode, I wanted to talk to somebody who was male. Obviously, you guys know the Toy Talks podcast is for Black women, about Black women, teaching Black women how to navigate the world of work successfully and lighten up the path of their own success. But equally, we can't just talk about Black women without also talking about Black men. And I know I have a lot of Black men that listen to the podcast and often write in and are really happy with what they feel that they can pick up and learn from the podcast. So, Joe, one thing I want to, there's many things I want to talk to you about, but with the resurgence of Black Lives Matter, and you're quite senior, you're actually director level where you work, I wanted to understand from the Black male perspective how you have been affected from a work perspective in relation to Black Lives Matter, and how you are navigating the work differently now in comparison to how you were before the Black Lives Matter resurgence.
Interesting question. I think everything that's happened with the Black Lives Matter movement has put the conversation in sharp focus. So whereas before we were all aware of the things that were going on, it's kind of interesting how the power of what we all saw, that visual of seeing someone with a knee on their neck, has brought up a wide range of conversations that, that span globally, even to levels of tribalism in different countries and stuff like that. But then also in terms of the workplace and people feeling like actually people don't really know who I am and what I've been through and what I have to navigate as a Black person in the workplace. And so I found that really interesting because the main approach to it up to that point has been to find adaptations and ways of navigating around it. Whereas now, it's kind of like head on. You have to have an opinion about it. You have to have a discussion about it. Some of those discussions are constructive. Some of them are quite aggressive. Some of them make people feel uncomfortable. But those conversations are happening. And even in places where they're not happening, there's an awkward elephant in the room where people are aware they're not happening. So I think it's forced us to face it head on. And you realize that some people just don't know how to face it. We're learning and we're figuring out how to go about it. But in my workplace, we got together as a group of us Black people, and we had a conversation with the rest of the office about what it means to us, what our experiences are like on a day-to-day basis, but then also in the work environment. And some people were very surprised by it. Some people were very supportive. Largely, it was very supportive. And we're very interested in kind of moving towards solutions more directly that would affect us in our little space, our little bubble, but then how our behavior contributes to things wider, in terms of our wider contribution to society. Because a lot of people are just living their own world, which is a thing that I'd learned. You think that people are aware of it and choosing not to do something about it. It's that more that they're aware of it doesn't affect them, so they carry on. So there's been a lot of learning all around, I'd say.
But you're downplaying it a little bit because you were kind of... So basically, Gio basically wanted to initiate the conversation. And I think when we had that discussion, I think something that I was quite surprised at is that you wanted to lead that conversation, because there is a lot of people that have written in, especially when everything happened with George Floyd, people were hoping that somebody would lead that conversation. And some Black women were like, actually, should I lead that conversation? But were quite fearful. Now, the reason why I was a bit surprised when you said it is because I feel like it's easier for black men to have difficult conversations at work than it is for black women. And it is because of black men's proximity to whiteness and being able to talk about certain things, i.e. football, whereas black women don't have that. So I want to understand, like, in as much as you were willing to lead that conversation, do you think it would have been a different outcome had a black woman had that conversation in your workplace instead of you?
Well, I actually, for transparency, had the conversation with 2 other black women, and we had a conversation ourselves first, where we were like, look, everything that's going on here, we were all struggling, really. We were kind of like, there was a pain and there was a heaviness. I don't know, I mean, everyone kind of felt it.
Yeah.
Everyone felt it, but you didn't know why it was, you didn't know how to process it. And I think what we found difficult was the fact that when we're at work, or when we're on the screens, as it were, the new work, everything is going on as normal. And it's like, this isn't normal. Like, why is everyone just pretending as if this doesn't exist? You're wishing away so much, but this is weird. This is weird. This is more awkward than what having the conversation would be. So, you know, we had a conversation and we said, you know, I want to have this conversation. They said, I mean, it's funny enough, I probably hadn't thought about it, but based on the things that you said, they were very much like, I think it would be best coming from you, and I was happy to do that.
But why did you think that was the suggestion? Why do you think because there's 2 women, right? And why do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I'd probably say maybe because I've been there longest, maybe because I was the guy, maybe because I was probably the most senior in how it looked.
Right,
I don't know. But I certainly hadn't taken into account how it might have come across from their perspective. I just thought, one of us, either way, but we'll all be there, we'll all hold hands, and we'll all be there to support each other as we go through it. That was kind of more my mind frame. But it is interesting because those are kind of barriers, whether they're conscious or unconscious, that are there. You know, from my perspective, I was just like, we just need to have this conversation because this is weird. It's like, it's too heavy and it's painful, you know?
Okay, so when you had the conversation, what would you say changed? And now as you're navigating work as a black man, has it been made easier because you've had that conversation about Black Lives Matter and how it actually, the deeper subject of how navigating as a black person is marginally different to white people? I
think there's been a lot of awareness from their side. There's a lot of stuff that I thought of as just ignoring the situation, but was actually oblivion, whatever the word is. They were oblivious to the actual impact of it. And so now, when we're talking about issues to do with work, I mean, it's not to say that it comes up as a subject matter in absolutely everything, but we're definitely more aware of ourselves as a company in terms of the age distribution of the people there, the different genders, and everyone's got a voice. And I think there'd always been conversations that are about some of the other subjects, you know, whether it's to do with women in the workplace and empowering women to make sure that they can be in a position of equality from, you know, having director level jobs and all the rest of it, LGBTQ conversations and the impact of that in the workplace. But it never felt like there was a conversation around how it is to be black in the workplace. And that's what we did, and we provided that insight. And we were almost like waiting for them to come and say, oh, how do you feel that everything that's happening? And that felt like, well, actually, why are we waiting for them to tell us when we have now permission for you to talk? We're going to drive this ourselves. We're going to have this conversation because no one's going to do it for us. If we literally let the awkwardness exist, it will subside and we'll just be in a position where, you know, this is put into the same, it's politicized but put into the same category as virtue signaling. Whereas this is something that's physically, mentally affecting people who sit next to you on a daily basis. You should know.
But wasn't you a bit fearful of kind of the consequences of having that conversation? I know that you've been there for a while, but wasn't you worried that actually this could possibly change the dynamic of the workplace and make my work experience here quite difficult?
I think naturally, yes, but also it was like I said, it's like it was more awkward not to have it because it also makes you look inside yourself to say, well, am I playing the game that has been designed for me to be at this level? So, you know, I don't want to hear about your stories. I don't want to hear about your background because it makes me uncomfortable. So what we're actually talking about here is my experiences, our experiences, versus how you might feel a bit awkward hearing about them. It's chalk and cheese. It doesn't compare. You know, your 1 hour, we actually did on the lunch break, ended up being like a 2-hour chat, and you know, it was quite cathartic and emotional. But that 1 hour, 2 hours is just a little visit into what it's like for you to feel uncomfortable for that little space of, you know, brief moment. Whereas for us, it's every day.
Yeah.
Some things are even ingrained. So it wasn't even like a battle in my mind as to what the consequence could be, because you already live it. You already experience it in different ways. So, you know, and also I think my company, we've spoken about this before, I think my company is a lot more open and liberal than most in terms of being attentive to certain issues. So I never for once thought that I'd be marginalized for talking about it. The one thing I was worried about is that a lot of these kind of issues get politicized. I've heard a lot where people kind of saying Black Lives Matter is a political thing, and, you know, things that are happening in the media, and people are saying, we get it, you know, this stuff affects you as Black people, but we're going to tell you where you can have the conversation. We don't want you to have this conversation during Britain's Got Talent, because that's when I'm relaxing. We don't want you to have this conversation during the Premier League, because that's when I get to escape. Go and do it in the corner over there. Okay. Because now you're politicizing my experience of the things. Whereas for me, it's not it's a human rights thing. Like, you wouldn't want anyone that to be treated, you wouldn't treat someone like that, you wouldn't want to be treated like that. So the politics side of it is obviously people using it from that perspective. But my view on it was like, because I've got this relationship with these people that I work with, I would consider some of them friends, they would understand at the human level, and they did, thankfully.
But what has changed since you've had that conversation? So the reason I'm asking this question is because a lot of reactions and promises to do better and promises to make changes have been performative, as far as I'm concerned. So what has changed off the back of that conversation? In recruitment and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm honest, I would say it's going to be a longer process.
Yeah.
It's not going to be something that you see the fruits of it right away.
Yeah.
But what I will say is that people are definitely open to checking examples where unconscious biases happen, where nepotism creeps in and people don't realize it. And like you said, with recruitment, you know, we always had like a diverse array of people that we're recruiting, but I've definitely noticed it now, and the candidates that are coming through are more representative of the people that we see around. But it's gonna take a longer process. I mean, I was quite honest about that when we said it. I was like, some things I don't think will ever really change, because it's a two-way thing.
Yeah.
We can point out what the issues are, but we also need you to help facilitate some of those things changing. And where we've got to at the moment, I think, is the awareness part. You know, we've got to the awareness part where people are going, okay, I'm accepting that this is an issue. I'm accepting that this is an issue that has an impact on people. And we're working together to sort of figure out, well, what are the tangible things? And like you said, recruitment is definitely one of them, to make sure we've got that diversity in there. We already are quite diverse, but we're already making sure that you're not picking someone, or you're not looking at someone because they look like I look. You know, because that's the other side of recruitment that often people don't talk about. You can be qualified for a job, but you know, in the nature of the business that I work in, it's also important that you can work with people. That's essentially saying it's nepotism. That's saying that someone like me, someone has interests like me. But you can't say that word, because that goes straight into the lane of discrimination and all the rest of it. But we all do it in everyday life, and so that part of it where you go, well, let's check ourselves to make sure that we're giving ourselves room to employ people that are definitely qualified for the job, because you wouldn't employ them otherwise. But we're not scared of the challenge their difference will bring. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Okay. And I think that's the process. That's where we're headed. And it's not like, do you know what? That might be a bit difficult for that person to integrate because they're not like us. You know, it's like, no, actually, we need that, because that will open our eyes to a little bit more, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I have a lot of listeners who are either first-time jobbers or people who are currently looking for jobs, especially because of the market and the way the pandemic has just changed the commercial space. So as somebody who interviews, like, I talk about this all the time, like whenever I've had to interview people, things I look for. And I've had to be quite honest. When I see a Black person, it's not that I give them, I'm not going to say I give them leeway, but there was something there was a post I saw on social media where it says, when there's an application for a job, a Black person has to qualify 100% of that application. whereas a white person can only qualify about 40% and they're off to the next stage. So I think that I always have that at the back of my mind. So if a black person is coming for an interview, number one, I'm really excited to see a black person because I now know, I look at them and I'm like, I know where you've walked because I've walked that same journey. In terms of recruitment, what are you seeing now in terms of black people off the back? When I say off the back of Black Lives Matter, because it's opened up a conversation. I think black people can take a few more risks and have a few more conversations. But as we're now starting to interview for jobs, you know, are you seeing a change in kind of, number one, the type of candidates that are coming through, the type of questions that are being asked, or, you know, what are your experiences? And I'm actually trying to push you to say that example that you said before we were recording about the personality, because it's actually a huge point, because people don't understand that when you're going for a job, it's not just about your qualifications. Yeah. And I say that because the person who's interviewing you, in my especially in my field, they're not qualified. White people are not qualified. No, their skin color is their passport to qualification, in my experience. So I know that it has to be more than that. It has to be, can they see, for me, it's like when I go to an interview, they need to see that they can see themselves working with me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know it's a bit convoluted, but I'm trying to push you to
give
it.
I get what you're saying. I think for me, how I would clarify it would be that, and this is the unconscious part that we don't acknowledge and face on. Yeah. There is you being qualified for the job. So say for the example that you're giving where you're 40% qualified, right? But then you end up getting the job. The person who's doing the interview and recruiting can see themselves working with them, right? So all of the other bits that are not quite there, they can see themselves improving. They can see the parts where they can develop into what they want it to be. I think because of these because of how we as black people sometimes suppress or try and present what we think someone else wants, the 100% then kicks in where it's like, if anything, I don't want them to say that I'm not qualified for the job. So 100%. Like what we were saying earlier is, you know, careful not to give too much information in the example, but you know, it's a person I interviewed recently where I saw that they were very new, very green, very able to learn and take on the job, but the academic journey that we go on as black people in the home is because you're told, work harder, make sure you get those top grades, make sure you don't give them a reason for them not to select you from an academic point of view. And so going back to your example, you're talking about the 40%, the other 60% that person used to get that job, you can describe it as nepotism, them having the same hobbies and all the rest of it. That's the thing that made them get selected over the person that had 100%, because I could see myself working with you, so we can fix the rest. So in the recent example that we were talking about before, it's one of those whereby I feel that sometimes as black people, you can sort of look at the qualification side of it rather than say, well, actually, let me show them who I am, you know? Ironic, I mean, for me, from my perspective, I wasn't like the strongest A stars academically. So I always relied on them knowing who I am and what I can bring. I'm a problem solver. So I wanted to give me a problem so I can tangibly show you what to do. Yeah. So I always naturally was like wanting them to show my personality as part of that. But I can see why a lot of people might have been suppressed to the point whereby it's like, show them the grades, no one can deny you. Show them the grades, no one can deny you. And then you're thinking, well, someone with lower grade got the job instead of me. Well, they got it because the person who was employing could see themselves working with them. They couldn't see themselves working with you because the personality didn't fit with what their personality is. And that goes into a wider conversation about making sure we've got a seat at the table making those decisions, because then you can see yourself. I could see myself in this person because, and I could be right or wrong. I could be making up the fact that I'm like, you know, wanting to coach them into showing a bit more of their personality. Or maybe they didn't have the personality at all. And it's just a case of me willing them to do better because I could see myself in them. I could see myself as, you know, that vulnerable black person who's like, just all you got to do is punch through and show your personality. And then they've got no reason whatsoever not to give it to you. Do you know what I mean?
I definitely feel as though as black people, and when I say black people, I'm talking about black men, black women, but obviously like my heart is with black women because I know that we are often never picked, if at all considered. But our shoulders we have a lot to shoulder, and I feel like on top of everything else as black women that we shoulder, a lot of us from households where our parents have come over, first generation immigrants, and they're in survival mode.
Yeah.
So automatically, it's almost like we have PTSD survival.
Yeah.
So when you're going to that job, you're not thinking about your personality. I'm thinking about, I've got bills to pay, I've got to save money, and then I've got to pay rent to my mum, who I'm living with, who's basically told me this is my responsibility now. And I remember an earlier episode, I was talking about this guy that I used to work with, and he literally finished his master's. And long story short, for him, it wasn't just about getting a job. It was about, I need to pay my parents back. So when he's now going into interviews, he's not thinking about personality. He's thinking, right, I've got everything I need to do. I've got all my qualifications right. I've got an interview. I just need to basically regurgitate everything that's on the CV. Screw my personality. No one gives a shit about that. We'll deal with that when we get into the office. And I think what people, especially black people, I think that need to appreciate a bit more is how important personality is.
Yeah, I mean, what I would add one caveat in that is just to, again, I don't think I mentioned at the beginning, I work in advertising, so I work in the creative field. And so my job is very much client facing. So that part of the personality is integral. It's important, right? The jobs that we maybe get driven towards academically by our parents, the safe bets, the lawyers, the doctors, the data analysts, they are more often than not what I believe are jobs that you can get away without showing your personality. You can show up to work, not talk to anyone, no one knows anything about you. You're really good at what you do, but you're back end, right? Yeah. But what I want and what I like to enjoy seeing is us being put on the forefront. Yeah. And it's a delicate one because you can be put in the front for the wrong reasons, which is tokenism. Yeah. But I want to see it for the right reasons, which is your personality shining through, being yourself, enhancing that corporation with something that they could never have, giving them some spice, because that's what they don't have. Yeah. You know, they've got the ingredients for a good meal, but you don't have the. And that's the difference, I would say, because there's definitely that distinction depending on what industry you work in. Yeah, for some, you can definitely get away without showing your personality, because then it's just for, you know, going down the pub or feeling like there's a bit of banter around the workplace, which that's just is what it is. But in terms of you succeeding within your profession, if you're front client facing, your personality is gold dust. It's what will win you whatever you need to. So I'm so empathetic of that story from the black woman perspective, because, you know, in these times, everyone's having to educate themselves and learn different things. And I think a lot of people are, especially black men, maybe we're not vulnerable enough to admit that, you know, we need to sit back and listen to these experiences and really think about how we can foster solutions for them, because it's easy to just dismiss them and go, I don't have that problem. I don't go through that. Oh, you're just making excuses. And I think it's important to actually take a step back and listen to them, because I have to admit, it's maybe not something that I thought about as often as I would have thought. The same experiences I have. Yeah. I've navigated through them, so we can find ways around them. And what we were talking about earlier is, you know, maybe as black men, we're more, we put ourselves in situations whereby we can flex our personalities to get whatever we need to. Yeah. Whether it's manipulation or not, it's something separate. But we can have the chat about, you know, going for a few beers, or have a chat about football, or, you know, have a chat about whatever. Whereas, you know, maybe those opportunities are not as open to women and black women more specifically. You know, I've heard stories of, you know, people who work in the financial industry as women who, you know, end up going to the strip club because that's where the business is happening or whatever it is, and they don't want to be there, but they know not being there is missing out on the discussions because that's where the business is happening. I don't think those practices happen anymore, but you get people going, okay, I'm going to adapt myself to be able to do it. That's harder still for black women, because you're not only navigating a workspace that's male oriented, but you're then also a minority within that.
Exactly, and I think that's the reason why I do the podcast, because I feel like with black women, our experiences are just completely different. And I definitely know, like with your cousin, he's witnessed, but I've had to sit him down and educate him. So when I talk about the black education, I'm talking about in the world of work, whereby also as well, I know, like I talk about this all the time on social media, where sometimes I have a superhero complex, and part of that superhero complex, it makes me a lot more fragile with black men, because if I'm working somewhere and I see a black man who is unjustly treated, automatically I just want to throw myself in there and show him that I'm an ally. But I don't get that. I've never, ever received support in any way from a black man in the world of work. And often what I've tended to find is in the industry I work in, is if there is going to be a black director, he's more likely to be male. And I'm not asking for special treatment, that's not what I'm saying, but it's the understanding and it's the awareness that when black women are navigating work, we're navigating the stereotypes of being angry. So we're not allowed to be upset. We have to be almost like a caricature of ourselves. We're also navigating the fact that as a woman, we may be earning significantly less than a man. And that's just on a gender basis. Then if you take it to a race basis, we're still earning less. And it's a lot. And I remember when I was working, there was a particular place I was working at, and I was quite senior there. I was training loads of people, loads of members of staff. And there was a black guy, and he basically sat, he was a junior to me. And I found out that he was earning almost £15,000 more than me.
Wow.
And I felt, do you know what it was? It wasn't even so much that I was angry. I was just upset at the fact that even when I'm winning, I'm losing. And as a black woman, it's almost like, I'm not saying we need to win every race, but we need to win something.
Yeah.
And I think black men don't take the time enough to understand the black woman's struggle. And I feel like they have even more of a responsibility to know that struggle. Absolutely. If they have black sisters, a black mother, black relatives. So I guess what I want to know from you is more about how have you been able, especially during this change in times, been able to educate yourself about the struggles that black women go through daily?
Yeah, I think what for me, one of the main things is, it's funny, like, it really makes you think about why you have issues with something. Sometimes you have a problem with something, but you don't know why. So you kind of like brush it aside. I've never liked all-encompassing terms and how social justice is described. So specifically when I talk about gender equality and BME as titles, descriptions.
Well, I don't like BAME anyway.
I detest it personally. But looking at gender equality, that was the first moment where I looked at it and I went, so we're talking about, we're gonna wrap you up, black women, as part of women, right? Yeah. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna, as a company, we're gonna implement measures to make sure that we balance that disparity, right? And that means that across the company, there are gonna be more opportunities for women, right? Now, you're already in a situation whereby when you take a step back and you look at it, you're going, that's the issue I have with it. Because although I empathize with the struggle that women have been through, and I completely believe with the cause and the struggle, that conversation marginalizes a black woman within it without real. I didn't know why. Yeah. But it's that whole kind of, crabs in a bucket mentality. There's this guy that I saw a video about. I always do this when I forget his name, but he described it perfectly, where he was talking about we're always put in a situation whereby all you need is one to demonstrate diversity. So if there's 10 of us in a room and we're all men, and people say, oh, do you know what, there's not a lot of women on the board, we'll get one woman, right? Or if we need more diverse from a race point of view, we'll get one Asian guy, and that says, and then we'll call it, we've got representation on the board or committee from BAME. So when you read it, it looks like, oh, there's black people on the board. Yeah. Oh, there's a woman on the board. Yeah. So if you're looking at it from that perspective and it's just one, what I'm learning in my education to myself, what are the chances of that one being a black woman? Do you know what I mean? And from that perspective, it makes you sad because the system gives you messaging that things are changing, and people who are completely outside of that world, who are reading it as a report or whatever, it looks like we're making steps towards it. But when you were recruiting for that position, for that one woman to go on the board, where did you go to get CVs? Did you look internally? Did you look outside? Did you go to places where there's successful black women or women managing? You probably looked around and said, she'll do, and she's probably the person that gets on with you very well, and it's you making the decision. Did you get someone from the outside to come help you source and make that decision? So all of these systems are only going to be built to select one, and that one is less likely to be one of us, and it's even less likely to be a black woman. So when you look at it from that perspective, as black men, we should be looking at we should be more unapologetic about fighting for issues that are directly related to us. And there's nothing wrong with saying that out loud, because it's just challenging the system. Just challenge the system and ask questions to go, how are you going to do that? And someone has to answer the question. That's all it is, because at the moment we don't ask the question enough, and I think that's what we've been doing a lot more, is going, well, how are we going to do that?
Yeah.
You know?
Okay. All right. Well, I know this is a bit of a serious episode, but do you know what? I'm going to do another episode with Gio, but this one has to be a bit more serious, I think, because number one, it's the first time I've had a male on the episode, but also as well, I really thought it would be really beneficial for black women to hear from a black man. And now, obviously, your opinions are your own, but I thought it would be just interesting because I've never had a black guy on here before. But guys, I'm going to record another episode with Gio, but I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to say thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Toy Talks podcast. If you want to email me, want to ask me any advice with your dilemmas, please email hello@toytalks.com. And of course, you can follow me on social media. My Twitter handle is Toya_W. Instagram is Toya_Washington or Toya_Talks. My name is Toya Washington, and you have been listening to the Toy Talks podcast.